I'm Ed Rabyd, otherwise known as the Rabyd Atheist, a former pastor turned atheist, now compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Feel free to like or dislike the video as you see fit, so feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it is released. You're also free to share my videos as much as you like. The purpose of this channel is educational, so in particular in regards to deconversion and atheist issues, and those issues in regards to the Bible, the theology, and occasionally politics thrown in particularly when it involves separation of church and state issues. Today's Rabid Ramblings is brought to you by a comment that I found so interesting that I was going to just answer the commenter, but then I said, you know, this is one of those things where I really want to unpack this one, because it's a very interesting comment in the sense that it involves a deconversion issue, in particular about work. And this comes from Keen, and I want to give this individual credit, appreciate the comment. But Keen writes this in a comment, and I was going to just respond to it, but then I said, you know, this would make a good subject for a Rabid Ramblings. This is a bit astray from what you discussed, and this is returning to my recent Jehovah's Witness series. But it's something you have mentioned from time to time in your videos, and I was interested in your views on it. What I picked up from your videos in discussion of work and how staying employed forced you to stay in an environment which we found toxic. Maybe this is too harsh, but it's what I get from your work as a pastor. And I wanted to know your views on work. Okay, I want to address that, whether I considered my work toxic at the time in the ministry. My first church, from a purely administrative point of view, I made a lot of mistakes in the fact that I thought I could duplicate what I did as a Christian education pastor in that church. And what I failed to understand is that people are very, very different. They're at different places in their development as a church. You know, now I kind of look at it as a colossal waste of time. But at the time, I would say that my inability to get the church to grow was me, mostly, because I was very young and I made a lot of mistakes. But once I realized I made the mistakes, I didn't really feel I had a way out. My second church was definitely toxic. They had been hurt by a previous pastor, and they were just, you know, very political, very backbitey. I had one couple in the church when I was elected basically tell me that they felt that my election was illegitimate because they didn't support it. They wanted somebody else. That same couple constantly threatened the church with leaving and taking their money with them because they didn't like me. And this is like right out the gate. I hadn't even done anything. And so that was a pretty toxic environment. The person that eventually was instrumental in my leaving there took something I said the wrong way and then refused to admit they were wrong. So that was kind of the way it went. My last church wasn't toxic. In fact, I got compliments of how, I guess, my experience as a person dealing with small groups of people, I had learned how to get the garbage out of it. But at the same time, it was the theology and the belief system that was really giving me trouble personally. It became toxic there, not because of any decision that the people made, other than one individual who I would now, looking at some of the psychology, I would consider a sociopath. People that take enjoyment in other people struggling through social issues was definitely one of his things. You know, his common expression is, you know, I do everything for my own entertainment. And a lot of what he did for his own entertainment was embarrass people. So, and, you know, make people feel like they were stupid. And he tried to do that with me and it didn't work. So he kind of worked with me for a while. But then when the church got too big, he started sabotaging stuff I would do, you know, whisper campaigns, stuff like that, nothing major. But was it toxic? No, the problem with work at that point is that I often had to I took a job working for a company that I didn't really want, but I needed the money. And the church wasn't providing for it. In my terms of ministry, and you need to understand this for me to answer some of the later questions, but you need to understand in the ministry for me, I never really made enough money, except for maybe 2 years of it, to really support my family in a way that brought us a little bit of prosperity. There were 2 years in my second church. The problem in my second church, it was very toxic, but also what made it difficult to leave is the money was really good and we had a parsonage, so we didn't have to pay rent. And that made it, I mean, I paid off a lot of debt that I accrued in the first church, in that second church. And that was the benefit of it. And I really wanted to stay there for a couple more years to get all the debt paid off. And then I would have been in a position to do better, but it just wasn't to be, because of people. So, moving on here. In the Bible and other religions, the concept of work is promoted. The whole issue of being idle is considered sinful. I always found this a bit amusing because isn't heaven any type of afterlife always with a place without work? Supposedly, yes. I've always thought that was an interesting contradiction, that you work now really hard in the short term, but the rest of the time you're going to be lazing around clouds and strumming harps. There's no proof or evidence for any kind of afterlife presented to anybody that's convinced me that there is one. And so this is kind of to me, it's a trick. It's dishonest, because you're getting free work for the church. You're getting free money for the church because people go out and work jobs and they give you 10, 20%, give you money in offerings and donations. It's really a racket, in my opinion now. So what you do is you end up sacrificing some of the prosperity that you could have had in this life by busting your ass. Now, the idea of working without being idle is, boy, if you have time off and get to relax, boy, the devil can really use that for whatever. I don't believe in the devil now. I do, however, have a different view on work and what it's for, but I'll get to that in a bit. And to that point, wasn't the Garden of Eden a place without work? Well, not true. Adam is said to have been particularly created to till the ground, even in the unfallen state. So there was still work to be done. It's just when you read the work that it describes initially and the curse afterwards, where it makes, it's so much harder and everything's more difficult, then work becomes a burden. But in the Garden of Eden, supposedly work was a nice thing. And a lot of people, like the Jehovah's Witnesses, believe in paradise on earth, so they still kind of believe that there's going to be work. It's just, different. It appears to me now that many of these religious texts are political vehicles, which maybe started out as philosophical musings, but became a ways to create societal order and the right citizen, whatever it may be for that particular group. So being a good worker or slave is heavily promoted. Yes, this is true. I personally believe that when you read like the Old Testament, it would have justified a lot of Old Testament, a lot of people in that time frame's dictatorial style of leadership. The fact that the king is like an absolute monarch that acts like God, that he'll commit genocide, that he'll slaughter men, women, and all the male boys, but we're going to keep the little girls so when they grow up they can be sex slaves. And that's perfectly acceptable. But being a good worker or a slave is heavily promoted because that leads to other prosperity for the church. The biggest thing that you need to understand here is that the more money people make in a church, and if there's some sort of rules about tithing, or their money is automatically deducted, or the church sends them a bill for being a member, or whatever way that church supports itself, what that means is the more money the people in the church make, the more prosperous they are, the more prosperous that the church is going to be. And so good work is promoted. I mean, this is how the Puritans were so successful in the United States. I mean, you got to give them credit where credit is due, because they realized that they were going to have problems. A lot of people don't know this, but the first year, that the reason why the Pilgrims got in such trouble is it wasn't just really bad crops, but they kind of set themselves up for bad crops, because they told everybody only to grow so much stuff and not so much food. It was a really socialist kind of idea. And they got that from the book of Acts. The problem was they got slaughtered. They didn't have enough. And I can't remember, 100 pilgrims died in the early going, I think. I recall maybe 50 to 100. I don't remember. But the idea was after that no, we're going to grow. You're going to be able to grow as much food as you want, trade it with your neighbors. And, you had kind of a free market economy then that was regulated to make sure people didn't rip people off. But the hard work ethic from the Calvinist point of view, that's how you prove that you're a Christian, is you work hard and you're prosperous. Well, actually, how you prove that God likes you is you're prosperous, but the way to become prosperous, according to God, is to hard work. You don't really need God in that equation. If you want to be prosperous in this life, just bust your ass. Okay, that's just true. If you want to work 12 hours days and all that stuff, that's how to do it. She gives the example of the Mormons, for example, have to do their missions to youth and volunteer time called work. Okay, this is where the whole church work thing becomes a little bit even more insidious. It's not just the money. They get you to what I would now consider waste your time doing missions and stuff. I look back on myself and I remember as a minister, particularly in my denominational days with the Assemblies of God, I found myself, well, I got to give this because we need, to do the mission. I need to create a Sunday school and evangelism emphasis and things like that because we got to win the lost to Jesus Christ. And you end up spending a lot of time trying to convince people to be Christians that most of the time they don't really care. They just don't. And so that's kind of one of those things where you just kind of, deal with it. So I don't know. I just kind of got to a point where I now realize how much time and money I wasted. And that's kind of where things go and things happen like that. I just got to the point now I look back and I think to myself, if I had all that money back, I would be out of debt. I would literally have had no debt. I would have a good retirement. Not that I've ever made money in the ministry. I made good money in my second church, and that was the only church that I made decent money. The first one was okay, but I had to buy a house because I didn't have a parsonage. And when you take that all into consideration, it's not very lucrative. I could have become a prosperity preacher, and I would have probably had tons of people in church, and I would have made a shit ton of money. But I had ethics. I disliked the prosperity preachers back then because I thought they were, people that stole. So it wasn't my thing. Then, but it's also the time. All the time I spent trying to promote something that I now consider to be imaginary. I'd like to have that back. I'd like to have, but the whole Great Commission thing, the whole convinces you to work for something that has absolutely no evidence that it's even true. Now when I look at it, okay, I was working for a God that I no longer believe exists. I was fighting for the gospel, which I now consider to be really kind of convoluted, promoting a Bible that I think is no longer the Word of God. And I sure as hell don't think there's a hell, if you like that one. I just don't believe that kind of afterlife exists. There's no evidence for any of that. Okay, so what do I work for now? Okay, this work, okay, she ends it this way, and this is what I really want to talk about. I hate to make you guys sit through all this, but you have to understand the context of where I'm coming from when I make some of the statements I'm going to make later. This work, of course, is not supposed to create pleasure, but to be a duty. My question is, do you see work as a pleasure now, or do you see it as a duty and a necessity? That is the question, isn't it? How does an atheist view work? Before, it was always a sense of duty. It was always a sense, I have a duty to Jesus. I have a duty to the gospel. I have a duty to all this other stuff. And I used to preach that duty was not a bad thing, that it was a good thing. I now don't consider duty to be as virtuous as I once thought, because duty with it has this element of submission to authority blindly, okay, that you just do what the authority says, regardless of whether or not what they're doing is right. You're washed of it, you're cleansed of it with your work and your duty because you do it out of a sense of duty. I no longer believe that. I think that's a load of crap. Okay, I've gotten to the point where duty to me is not really the issue. Now, you probably have noticed over my shoulder that I have the 9 Noble Virtues, which I borrowed from Odinism. They're still my virtue code because I think human beings can discuss virtue regardless of the religious origin of it. And we can talk about whether certain virtues are virtues. Like we can have a discussion on courage, we can have a discussion on fidelity, and how those benefit our survival. And it doesn't really matter whether you're religious or not. You can talk about virtues as human things, whether they're beneficial to human beings. Two of those virtues up there that I form as my own personal code are self-reliance and industriousness. But I no longer work for anybody but me. And because I work for me, I take a lot more pleasure in it, because now I can see something tangible that helps me in this life, which I believe is the only life I get. So when I see the fruits of my labor coming to pass, now here's the real problem for me right now. Right now I'm working in a job which is okay, but I didn't go to 4 years of school at Ferris to do what I'm doing now, and it doesn't pay as well as what I want to do. So that's kind of it. That's why I'm working on a certification, which I'm not going to really talk about that until it happens, because I still have my enemies. I don't want them to know what I'm doing. But and so my issue at this point is finding enjoyable work that's enjoyable to me, that fits me, that makes me enjoy life. Part of that is this YouTube channel, becoming an atheist advocate and somebody who's a compassionate anti-theist, trying to convince people to become atheists a little bit. A lot of people say atheists don't have an evangelical agenda. Not really, but I'm just laying out there what I am and why I'm that, hoping that somebody will, get convinced. The biggest thing I do this channel for is young people considering the ministry, because I can tell you, based on my own experience, it's a trap. Okay, and it's a trap you need to avoid. Go do something else until you're 30. And if you're still convinced that you need to be in the ministry, I guess I can't help you. But, study out whether you should really believe in God or not, or the Bible or the rest of it. Listen to the actual critics, not the apologists who straw man all the time. Go listen to the critics themselves, and with an open mind, ask yourself some really hard questions. That's what this channel is for. And it's part of the work that I enjoy doing. If my subscriber base continues to grow, and I think I'm up to 89 or today, as of today, and maybe me more before I get up to post this video later. But if I get to a certain place like 100, I'm going to very much consider a Patreon account and a PayPal system if people want to donate to what I do. Don't have to. I'm not going to put any pressure on. I'm not going to make this my one and only source of income at this point, because that would be very foolish. My goal for most things I do now is to find ways to do things that I enjoy doing, not out of a sense of duty, but out of a sense of genuine love for what I do. And all the prosperity that comes my way, I want it to be mine. That sounds selfish, but I have literally given most of my life to helping others be prosperous while ignoring my own. And I don't want to do that anymore. It's not that, that you can only take so much before you say, I got to start doing stuff for myself. This, of course, puts me at odds with certain people in my family, including some of the people closest to me, because I'm not really interested in helping institutions dedicated to fictional characters anymore. I want to, if I work on something, I want it to have good, tangible results, and results that actually help people. This channel, to me, the quicker we get away from religion, the better. It's our first and worst attempt at understanding the universe around us, and we have better ways of doing that now. So to me, getting the religious baggage out of a person's life is the first step to actually gaining something as far as living long and prospering. To look at reality instead of fantasy is a big step. And so I don't mind, doing my part to push that along, but also being out here and being an atheist that can demonstrate, you don't have to be a jerk to be an atheist. You don't have to tolerate people being a jerk to you as an atheist. I think that's important. To help people who have deconverted and they're like, man, I'm really struggling with this. I used to think this way, but now I know that's not true. Boy, do I get that. And work has that aspect too, because for me, the purpose of work, the purpose of being industrious is self-reliance. I am not interested anymore in helping organizations unless I feel they help me become more self-reliant. That's why I would say, for instance, support the clergy project with my money whenever I get to a point of prosperity that's disposable income to me. I don't have a problem with supporting organizations that support separation of church and state, like FFRF. I don't have a problem doing that, but I want to make sure my own prosperity is secure. And this is the big difference to me. When you work and you're religious, you're spending a lot of time, quote unquote, working for God. And because of that, you will bankrupt yourself. I literally knew people, old people in particular, that were dumping their money to these prosperity preachers, and they just pissed me off that these guys were just taking their Social Security checks and not thinking. I'm like, you've worked all your life. And these guys, some of these guys had convinced them, oh, you got to give of your tithe of your Social Security checks. Well, dude, you already did all those years you worked. To me, it's the most nefarious thing that the religion still does. Wish we could stop it in the United States, but I'm a little bit of a libertarian, and I just prefer to educate people rather than use the force of law to stop it. Whenever you create a law, there's usually more problems with the law than it's worth most of the time. But looking at this, I now say, now wait a minute. The maxim, the Vulcan maxim of live long and prosper doesn't seem so stupid anymore to me. If this is the only life I get, then, it seems reasonable to me that I should work hard to gain some self-reliance. But I'm also going to tell you this. I have learned the value of being, well, for lack of a better word, lazy, of resting. I think it's Robert Heinlein who made the statement, that every great invention was somebody who was lazy trying to figure out a better way, an easier way to do something. Every great invention has been that way. And when you really look at it, it's true. We've used our leisure time to create things. And that's kind of where I want to get to. I want to get to a point where I'm prosperous enough where my leisure time is actually, bent on doing something useful again. My own personal view of work now is I want it to be enjoyable. I want it to lead to my own prosperity, and I want it to lead to my own self-reliance. So yes, I work, and I work hard, but I work for me. I don't work for anybody else but me. And that's an interesting conversation when you have an employer, because they'll want you to, well, you work for me. I said, no, I work for myself. Okay, I walk out of here any day. I'm not forced to be here. The United States is not a slave thing. If I don't like my employer and they're being assholes, I can leave. I've done it before. I've found other work. I'm not really worried about it at this present time. Unemployment, will get you through. It's not the best thing, but it'll get you through. And so I'm not stuck on something to the point where I'm doing, anything for anybody but myself. And here's the advantage of that. When I was in the ministry, I always struggled financially. It was awful. It was terrible. I repeatedly had times where, I was wondering if we were going to make the bills. My last church paid me $300 a week. That's like $1,200 a month. And later on, when I'd been there about 8 years, in 7 or 8 years, I finally got a $50 raise a week. And that was because the organist had died, or the piano player had died. And so we couldn't find another piano player. So they gave me and the organist some money. And we convinced them to keep some in the church. And it wasn't that hard to convince them. But the point was, of all the churches I worked for, my last church had the most money in the bank. They had very deep pockets, but they were also the cheapest to me in a lot of ways. And that's because the income was low. There was no tithing rules. So it was, hopefully somebody gives enough money in there so I can survive. And that's the way it was. And half of that time I worked another job in order to get some prosperity, but I didn't like the job because I was just doing it on the side. And this is the real problem with how religion and church and the whole thing just destroys any joy you can have in life, even from work. Because work should be something that you enjoy doing, because it helps you become more prosperous in this life. And the church just robs you of that. It destroys it. You got to work for God or you're not really doing real work. You got to put your tithe in the offering or you're not really spending your money the right way. They'll tell you not to spend money on frivolous stuff because they want more of it. And it just saps the joy out of you. It makes you a slave to the religious establishment, whatever religious establishment there is. And I don't have that anymore. I'm free of that. And it's hard to wrap my head around that sometimes, but I am free. I am more free from all that crap than I've ever been in my life. And here's the results. In the last 2 years, because I haven't been tithing, I have literally watched some of my debts completely disappear. And when I figured out what the tithe would be, it's pretty damn close to those debts. I'm making massive headway. And even though it's a job that doesn't pay as great as I want, and even though it doesn't have all the amenities I want, I'm still making progress because I'm not throwing my money down a hole. And that is what leads to prosperity. Working hard and learning how to manage your life a little bit is what leads to prosperity. Not religion, not God. God doesn't do dick because he doesn't exist, okay, as far as I'm concerned. And I just don't have time for that. You want to really, truly enjoy work, get rid of the religious reasons to work and start working for yourself. And you will find that it's very liberating and it leads to a lot better prosperity in your life from a financial standpoint. I mean, be smart, look at your stuff. I think the axiom to get out of debt is universal across most religions. Hard work in some senses may simply be something that we realize is necessary for survival, but it can also be enjoyable. And I'm telling you, once I lifted off the shackles of duty and started really truly embracing what I would consider true self-reliance and love for self, is when I really began to enjoy my work. And I know that's kind of a long way to answer that question, and I want to thank you for sticking around. I appreciate all of you listening to this little ramblings, but I think it was an important deconversion issue. A lot of people really struggle with this issue because they've spent so long working for the church and giving their money to the church, and now they're free of it, and they don't really know what to do with themselves. And I think you need to find a code or sit down and think about what your code should be. And don't get locked into one thing. I when through the clergy project, I got a lot of career counseling. And one of the things that I learned from that was learning how to come up with multiple plans for your life, multiple things you'd like to do and think you could do. And don't get into this sense of there's this one destined job that I'm supposed to have that you have in religion. That's just not true. It's kind of as stupid to me as I need to find the one that's right for me, that's the right person that's going to be my soulmate for the rest of my life. I'm not so sure that that's true either. That whole destiny shit just doesn't wash with me anymore. And you just need to understand that there's multiple things you can do, multiple paths you can take. Come up with multiple plans and do a little prototyping. Don't just jump in head first to everything. Just kind of say, okay, well, I want to see what this job is like. Is there any way I can figure out what I need to, and what do I need to do this job? And there's nothing wrong with it. And the funny thing is, at least in America, if you go and talk to somebody about their work and why they enjoy it, they'll tell you, okay, it's one of the ways we identify each other. So that's kind of where I'm at with work. I enjoy it much more. I still, right now, my current job, it's just not my cup of tea. It's not what I went to school for, and it's just not what I'm really interested in. It's just kind of a default. I'm doing well in it, don't get me wrong, and I do it okay. It's something I enjoy to a point, but it's just not what I do. I want to get more along the lines of doing things that I enjoy doing, and that's kind of my viewpoint on work. I hope that made a lot more sense. I've been rambling on here long enough, and I want to thank all of you once again for stopping by. And hopefully someday I can convince you to be a rabid atheist like myself. In the meantime, this is Ed Rabyd, also known as the Rabid Atheist, signing off and wishing you a good day.